Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Castleman, Gallery Coordinator, and on behalf of Mott Community College Fine Arts Gallery and the Art and Design Department, I would like to welcome you to Art Talk, a series of conversations that feature professional artists, educators, and historians as they share their insights into their creative processes and research into their work. I would also like to thank the Ballinger Trust for making this talk possible. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome artist and educator Andrew Rieder, whose exhibition Absolved of Essence Through Obsolescence is on display from now until January 25th. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for being able to meet virtually. And we are looking forward to talking about your show. It's up in the gallery and looking awesome.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I love seeing the work up all together for the first time, and I also appreciate the smooth transition with the installation too. That was a pleasant experience.
Yeah, we got that show up in record time. It was amazing, pretty amazing. Yeah. Shout out to Kimura for helping.
Yes.
All right, so I'm just going to turn the floor over to you, Andrew, and let you get started with your presentation. And then maybe hopefully towards the end, we'll be able to, talk a little bit more and have a few questions and kind of go.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Cool. So I'll bring up the PowerPoint here. And okay. Is this sufficiently visible? Okay. So the title of the exhibition, Absolved of Essence and Obsolescence, that's meant to signify trying to find identity in our work, and then also talking about of finding identity when one's work is deemed less useful or maybe in times useless. Depending on who the audience or the message is coming from. So these pieces, there's two different bodies of work, but the pieces as a whole, collectively, are expressions of my empathy towards that experience. So I'll move on to the first slide. So this is representative of the first body of work that I have in the show. And so all these are completed over, a few years. With a different pacing for each individual piece. They're intended to be tributes to individuals that I had associations and friendships with while I was working in Chicago in a hardware store on the north side. And so this is kind of me looking back years later, recognizing personal struggles that I was going through at the time and how these individuals unknowingly helped rebuild my sense of self-worth. So this is kind of both, kind of a tribute and a thank you in that sense. So these, the process here, like I said, these are the pacing for each piece was it's different. These started off with the base layer being self-portraits that I had done as demos for my Painting One classes. And so I had this, collection of paintings of myself, and it's like, well, how many of these do I really need, and what am I going to do with these? So I came up with this idea of how to kind of alter them. So you kind of see evidence of in this one here. This is probably the piece that has the greatest amount of evidence of a self-portrait in that break in the brick wall. And so what I would do is I would take different lengths and widths of masking tape and mask over the self-portrait and then apply a coat of spray paint, remove and I would do that a few times to kind of create this type of gridded or almost like a lattice work type of image. And then these more figurative elements, so the figure here placing the brick is done with oil paint separately on a sheet of gessoed Japanese printmaking paper. I think this was mulberry paper. And then that was later applied actually with oil paint as the adhesive, as the bonding agent. And so giving that time to dry and then adding other spray painted and oil painted elements to kind of make that that joining of the two images a little more cohesive. These are finished at different paces. This one was, the previous one I think was finished in either 2021 or 2020. This one I finished in 2018. This one came along pretty quickly in terms of finding a resolution with what I was doing with the different imageries. Process that I had described prior. The self-portrait, you can see it's kind of the figures over here laying on its side, kind of stenciled out. So it basically, it was turned into a more horizontal composition. And so with this one, again, it's this type of oil painting on a separate sheet of paper layered down with oil paint that I'm not really using as an adhesive or a bonding agent. And then at the end, everything's coated with a coat of varnish to kind of increase that bond there. So this one, similar process and content. This is titled Input, so it's kind of suggesting maybe a little bit of intergenerational communication.
I really love the figure in this in that painting with
the, thanks.
With the contrast.
And I enjoyed the contrast of the two the descriptions, but I also, it seemed like their expressions were similar, so it kind of seemed like there was kind of a connection between the two with those kind of facial positions. Mm-hmm. And also with this one, I think this might have been the first one where I was in the upper corner in the window experimenting with using we live in an older house, so I was using some curtains that we weren't using anymore as a stencil material. Mm. So you kind of see remnants of that in this one here. Oh, yeah. And in this one, the portrait, it's a little more that you have the eye and the nose and the mouth here, but it's a little more camouflaged than the others. This is titled Gaze. And then, the thing with each one of these is, even though there's a similar process that I have in place, or kind of a standard way of proceeding going forward, each one presents different challenges, because what works for one image will not necessarily have the same success with another attempt. And so you kind of have to re-strategize and improvise in the midst of the process. And this one, so this is an exception where there was no self-portrait underlying the image. And so what inspired this is actually my daughter, who's 4 now, was around a year old at the time. And she came home from daycare, and she just kept saying, "My home, my home." I guess that was a catchphrase for the day or something at school. And and it just, hearing her say over and over again, "My home, my home." And it just hit me in a way that I didn't expect. I guess that's part of parenting. There's emotional triggers that you didn't know were there. So it made me really happy to hear her say this, and to kind of gave me a sense of gratitude that we were able to have a home for her and provide that. And then I don't know what it's just a fatalism in my psyche or whatever. I immediately went to, oh, what if I couldn't? And so I just went down that rabbit hole. So it's kind of a combination of both gratitude and vigilance for what I have, a gratitude for what I have and what I'm able to provide, and family that I have, and then a vigilance of wanting to keep that as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So it's a very similar process to the other pieces, but the direction and the expression is different. And then kind of a return to the same content and process here. It's called Looking Up. And then you got evidence of the portrait over here on the left-hand side. And I probably did a little more spray painting of the bricks than oil paint with this one. So I think that's all for that body of work. This next one, it's a series that probably speaks more directly to the title of the show, with it really speaks more to, or is intended to speak more to, finding purpose in our work, and the struggles of individuals trying to find relevance through their work. So I've utilized images from CrossFit and functional fitness and strongman competitions, and pick your own fruit as kind of this examples of what I call leisure labor, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit more. But they're inspired by this ideas of a series of paintings is kind of inspired by two different quotes. One by Thomas Friedman in a recorded lecture. I heard him give this anecdote time he encountered pre-printing your boarding pass at home. So obviously this is from a long time ago. It seems like an archaic notion now, but at the time this was, it was his first time running into this. And so he had, planned on getting to the airport early and getting a good seat. And then he was wondering why he's having such a hard time, finding a good seat. And then he saw all these people with pieces of printer paper in their hands, waiting in line to board. And then he said, I realized in that moment that the airline had turned their customers into employees. And there's so many examples of this now that we, with automation and with the self-checkout and self-service, and it's, given to us in the under the guise or under the assumption of convenience. But it does, it does remove somebody's job to a certain degree. And the other one was a joke by Jim Gaffigan, where he talks about how people pay money to pick apples, and his line is, look, hey, you got any other manual labor I can pay you to let me do for free? And so I kind of am looking at all these different elements of leisure things that I've participated in, and so it's this kind of this phenomena of work that we choose to do because we feel better afterwards for having done it. And then the idea is also to kind of ask the question, does a task have to be undesirable or just less palatable in order to qualify as work in today's society? So if you are enjoying what you're doing, does it count as work? So it's just kind of asking that question. So, and I put these, so there's those images at play, but also you'll see a few in here where there's a lot of kind of tug of war with the ropes. And it's kind of addressing this idea of, in this need for all of us to find validation, do we then find it hard to see validation in others? And in a way, like we're all kind of wanting the same thing. But sometimes it feels like there's not enough to go around. So that creates conflict, because we all want validation for the work that we're doing, but then we sometimes worry that someone else's validation takes away from our own in some way. And these are, there's probably some better details as I go forward. But this one is maybe a bit of a separate piece from this series, but it still explores the same processes. It's called Labors of Love. It's meant to be basically, essentially a tribute to moms, and my mom in particular, who's actually depicted in the right-hand side of the panel. So the underlying painting was a oil painting I did from looking at an old family picture when we were at the beach. So the baby in the picture is actually me, and there's a hand, that's my dad's hand. So I, not any comment on these individuals, but I eliminated my dad and my great-grandmother from the painting, and had these stenciled imagery over top of it. So that's basically what the content is, and it's kind of this layering of different stencils over top of an original oil-based or oil painting base layer. And so this one here, entitled Resolve, again, the repetition, the metaphor with the ropes tugging. So not just conflict between individuals, but you see we have multiple individuals almost kind of forming together to make individual entities with these three here in the composition. So there's this idea, that kind of double meaning of the word resolve in trying to resolve a conflict, but then with the figure carrying the other figure on her shoulders through this chaos, the resolve to finding the resolve to push forward and to persevere. And then this one, trudge, kind of as it sounds, just it's a similar, very similar process to the first of this body work that I showed. Similar composition, almost similar scale, but really this idea of the daily grind, and what it means to go through that, and kind of the repetition, the idea of repetition in work, and then these figures that are kind of in the background. So it's part of that pick your own fruit type of imagery, but also this idea of onlookers or a crowd. That's something that kind of I've always been in, even before I started participating in it. That's something that kind of always intrigued me about, say, CrossFit. Is it kind of almost seemed like competitive manual labor, or almost like manual labor as like an event that we witness, and then we kind of cheer for different individuals. So it's this idea of work as competition in a way. Mm-hmm. And then this one entitled the pulling of the rope. Obviously, it's a ongoing motif, and you can probably tell I kind of got kind of attached to this figure with the strong man with the sandbag. He was just a really interesting figure and just kind of a fun one to describe, but also it's kind of where I saw a lot of overlap between, say, particularly strongman competitions and just general manual labor, and this idea of how ways of making a living have been transformed into sport, or and in some ways what I referred to earlier as leisure labor. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to focus on this one here. There's evidence of it in the first one that I showed, and actually in all of these, but probably mostly in this one. And what's exciting about this to me is that I'm kind of bringing back an old way of working, where the first body of work is kind of emblematic of a way that I've been working for a period of time, in combining oil paint and spray paint together, stencils, and having a much more traditional figurative way of describing the figure with oil paint. This is kind of a return to something I was doing maybe, I don't know, close to 20 years ago, with hatching and cross hatching with color. And then also what is there's also collage in all of these, the second body of work. And what's nice about collaging this way is, so I'm also, I'm spray painting and painting and describing on the initial surface. But then on top of that, I will spray paint onto the Japanese printmaking paper. Sometimes it's kitakata, sometimes it's akawara, sometimes it's mulberry paper. And I just like the really thin membrane that it has. So when you collage with it, it almost seems seamless, and it's, in some ways it can be somewhat undetectable at first glance that the work is actually collaged in, because it adheres to the surface and lays so flat that really there's a really nice joinery between the paper and the surface. So, but I've really enjoyed kind of bringing back this hatching and cross hatching and experimenting more with kind of a new tool in the toolbox are these acrylic paint markers. So that I found that has been an effective way of drawing with color into this process. So a lot of times what I'll do in these recent bodies is spray paint, the stenciled image like you see here on the actual paper, and then describe it on that paper, then cut it with an X-Acto, and then apply it to the surface with what I've been using for this is what's called PVA. It's a kind of like a water-based alternative to rabbit skin glue. I think Utrecht has a line of it. I think Gamblin also makes it as well. So it's kind of, it's a what's the right word? Not primer for canvas, but it's almost like kind of something you would coat your canvas with, I think even before putting gesso on, maybe, okay, if you were gonna go that route. So it makes it's a glue, but it's designed to make the canvas really taut, but it also works really well for collaging, especially with water-based media.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I love materials. I'm a total geek for new
Yeah.
materials, so I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah.
That. I love the texture in this one, and shift, especially the earlier ones that you showed. It almost had an enameled look to them. And the texture, or aside from being the kind of collage look, with the objects within that, was very smooth, and kind of to bring this visual texture in there, but still unifying with these same figures, is a nice shift.
Yeah. So it was, yeah, in some of these, if I could go back to maybe, so say for this one here, there was this kind of these stencils that were kind of a little bit painstaking to cut out, but that are used to kind of create this foliage. So I really enjoyed having these really flat, graphic but complex stencils that could be layered on top of each other. And even though it might not have, say, like a naturalistic description of foliage or botanical entities, it still kind of made that suggestion. So I enjoyed the challenge of trying to make that suggestion with flat graphic shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And then in some of these here too, there's kind of a more, I've kind of gone back to using, or even maybe like a newer endeavor to use acrylic paint. I've been using the golden open acrylics just because, yeah, just a slower drying time. And so it's not oil paint, but it's certainly, of any acrylic medium I've used, it lends itself the most to it.
Okay. Do you use the open acrylics with the open medium as well to extend the life, or do you just use them right out of the tube? Or...
I use them right out of the tube. I haven't. Sometimes the kits or the sets will come with a tube of medium, and I haven't tried that out yet. But because I found that at least for me, the drying time on the paint itself is slow enough.
Okay. I haven't gotten a chance to use, but again, those are one of those things on my shopping list. Like, I gotta try them.
Yeah. Yeah. So it takes a little, because you go in expecting, this is just going to be like oil paint. And I guess the viscosity is not the same. It just doesn't have that same feel.
Sure.
But in terms of being able to mix on the surface while you're applying it, it lends itself more to that than, say, just regular acrylics. So I think that is, do you want me to leave the share, or?
Is that the last slide?
I believe that was the last slide, yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and stop share. There we go.
Okay. So.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing your work. It was really awesome to kind of delve deeper into the process. I did have a question about some of the layering that you do in your work. Now, as you start this creative process, do you have kind of sketches that are kind of pre-laid out so you have an idea of the entire composition, or do you build as you go, as you kind of add these other layers in your art making?
I'd say in the first body of work, there's more of an idea of how it's going to go. I don't know if there's actually any sketches. But I kind of, in those, I primarily use the portrait, or the structure of the portrait, as kind of an initial compositional element. I think with the others, there was certainly an idea of where it might go. And I had an idea in my head, but I didn't necessarily, and sometimes the nice thing about having the stuff spray painted and worked out on papers, I can kind of arrange it on the composition before laying it down. So that kind of helps as a way of mapping things out. But, sometimes I do tell my students that I don't think I've ever made a piece that came out exactly how I envisioned it. So I have done preparatory sketches in the past, but even with that, it's still, it never comes out exactly as I envisioned it. So with these, I'd say for most of them, there was quite a bit of improvisation as part of the process, which can be a little nerve-wracking, but it's exciting too.
Yeah, yeah, that's I actually have a question that just
Okay.
came in.
Okay, nice.
We want to know, do you teach these techniques in class, as far as these layering, collaging, in your own painting studio, or how do you?
I've not taught these yet, but that's something to think about. I don't know, maybe that's one of my students. But I was, but yeah, I usually with painting one, I approach it with from a pretty conventional standpoint in terms of we start with still life and work with kind of the perceptual painting, and then branch into how that can be extended into abstraction from there. And I just particularly painting and starting with painting one, it can be such an intimidating medium for so many people. I really try to start small, and then gradually build up. Just because I learned doing really small paintings starting out, and I think I was actually forced to do really small paintings starting out before trying to get into these big grand creations. But I don't know. That's actually interesting. These processes in particular, I think, might work better for, say, like my drawing two class, which is I teach that more as a mixed media class to kind of explore different media rather than sticking with conventional drawing that I cover in drawing one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for the young art student who's just starting out, or the young painter, as you become an artist or professional artist? What's your kind of word of advice in?
Oh wow. I think it's something you really have to want to do it. That's the other thing. Or the first thing. I think there's no reason to do it otherwise if you're not really. I told had a student who she was receiving an award, and I was there to present. And we were kind of talking before we went up, and she was talking about her plans for graduation. And I said, if I was this, if I felt this comfortable with anything else, I'd probably be doing it. It's kind of both a blessing and a curse in that way, where I feel very fortunate that I've known for a long time that where the direction I wanted to go in. But it's also been one of those things where I've been kind of tied to it too. So it's been tough in that way. So I would just tell students starting out to be open to multiple possibilities. I think a lot of times, and I certainly think of myself starting out as a student, you have this idea in your head about where you're going to go, or what the long game is, and there's a lot of things that can pop up that will change that. And there's also things that pop up that really may change your mind. Say, oh, I don't know if I'm as into this as I thought. I started off wanting to go into illustration and potentially animation. Illustration seemed a bit rigid for me. And then animation, the idea of sitting in front of a computer as that much kind of turned me off to that. And so, yes, I made choices. I don't regret them, but it did make things maybe a little bit harder, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth doing. So I guess that's the other thing is like, this can be and probably will be hard and challenging, and that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's hard. So,
well, thank you so much again, Andrew, for talking to us today. And Andrew Rieder's exhibition is on the gallery on display from now until January 25th. So please check that out. And thank you to the Art and Design Department and Mott Community College. And we'll see you for next Art Talk. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.